Welcome to the reality show, a production of the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the ideas of Ayn Rand to current events. Today, joining us with thoughts and analysis will be Gilad Herzfeld, Robert Nasser, John Wos, and Kirk Wilcox. I'm Michael Liebowitz. We've got a couple of good topics for you today. We'll be discussing. Now I forgot it completely. What left me? Who should profit from what's going on in the war in Israel? This is sparked from a notion, I guess, from Elon Musk that any profits that he makes off his site X is going to be donated to Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza. And we'll also be discussing the morality of foreign aid. I think I got these topics right. I'm a little under the weather. I live with a 4-year-old petri dish, so I'm constantly getting sick. Not exactly pumped about it. But Gilad, what do you think about the idea of first of all, Elon Musk? I mean, it seems to be in response to the criticisms he's taken for supporting anti-Semitic remarks. But whatever the notion, what do you think about this idea of giving profits to either Israel or Gaza or both?
Well, giving any support to Israel, I think, is a really good thing. Like the issue is, who are you supporting? Are you supporting the good or are you supporting the bad? And supporting both sides in a conflict that obviously has a good side and a bad side is supporting the bad. So yeah, that's a big problem. And even like personally, Elon Musk for many years was a hero of mine. And in the last couple of months or in the last year, I'm more and more disappointed from the lack of like independent and honest thought that he shows.
Robert, what do you think about this? Should people be donating money to Gazans or Palestinians that live in Gaza? Is that okay? I mean, it's going to civilians as far as I could tell, to victims in hospitals and whatnot. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it depends on how it's done. As I said before, when the U.S. was talking about sending money, um, money is the most fungible commodity in the world. You send money someplace in Gaza, that's that much less money that Hamas needs to spend on the bare minimum that they give their citizens in the first place. My hope is that, and the reason why I think Musk's decision is actually something that I'm good with, is that they're aware of that and they will be working with the Red Cross to make sure that support money actually goes for support. We'll be talking later in the show about what the Pope had to say about all of the Pope. Why the hell? Why in hell on earth would we care what the Pope has to say? But it's a great question. The things that we see in war now, because of the kind of reporting that we've got, they're stomach turning. They're outrageous, and unfortunately, people pick and choose their news. So you would think we would all be on board with the right answer, but no. You look at this news, you look at that news, you look at these videos, you look at those videos. But because of it, we're now all too aware of what goes on in war. It's stomach turning. It's outrageous. It's insane to see what goes on out there. And because of that, for the same reasons, we also have better means to make sure, well, if we're going to do anything to support, then we make sure it actually does support the innocent to the extent that there are any innocents. And that's one of the things that the Red Cross organization is not perfect at. But if you're going to go with anybody, I'm glad they're going with the Red Cross for this. So I support Musk in this regard. I think he got hammered too hard. He was foolish to make the comments that he made on a thread that he made them on. He clarified it, but it's always too late to clarify afterward. But I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this decision. I think it's something that Musk believes in. It's not just a reaction to being hammered. So I'm good with that. You know, he's getting enough flack for his statements. His actions aren't that bad. You know, we should right size our level of condemnation. He's Elon Musk. He's some guy. He's not the government. And we'll talk about government foreign aid, but I'm good with Musk. I'm good with him doing this.
John, what do you think? Is this an honest decision on Musk's part because he believes it the right thing to do? Is it pressure he's getting? Is it right in any circumstances to be giving money to Palestinians, whether they be civilians or not? What are your thoughts, John?
No, I don't think it's right to give any money to the Palestinians, at least until the war is over, considering the fact that it's clear what side is right and which side is wrong. Yeah, he's an individual that has every right to do this, and I don't necessarily have a problem with him giving money to other people. But he seems to be playing both sides, which is completely dishonest. And I think it is more to save face for his sloppy remarks over the past forever now. What he's done to Twitter is so disappointing. But, I do think it's in his right to give the money away. Now, whether he's giving away profits from war, I think is a bizarre notion on his part, considering his profits are coming from the spread of information and advertising, not war per se. I think it's perfectly fine if he wants to give war profits that he sees away, but profiting off of things like that is no different than a doctor making money, mortician, a life insurance agent. I could go on, but making profit isn't inherently bad, which is the underlying concept under all these types of things, like these services that supposedly take advantage of other people's misfortune are still necessary services. Services like being a mortician or I always forget the word. Anyway, being a mortician or a life insurance agent is taking advantage, possibly, you could be seen as taking advantage of people's misfortune, but these are necessary services that we need. And without the profit motive, I don't think there'd be enough people providing these services, because they are, especially being a mortician, I couldn't see a lot of people gravitate towards that naturally. I know there's a few, but I'm just saying there's not enough of them for the amount we need as a society. So, yeah.
Thanks, John. Kirk, what do you think? Is there something wrong to profit off the spread of this kind of information pertaining to war? And is there something wrong with giving money to enemies in war or to the wrong side in war?
I mean, I think there's definitely something wrong with funding money to an enemy that you're at war with, or that one of your allies is at war with. But to sidestep this issue, one of the first things I thought of when I read into this was, what do Elon Musk's creditors think? And I think we need to also discuss this role. Like, what's the role of business? What's the proper role of a business executive like Elon Musk? Because my understanding of how he bought Twitter was he borrowed a lot of money. He leveraged a lot of his assets to borrow a lot of money to buy Twitter. After he went through with the acquisition, the value of Twitter fell off a cliff. And to my knowledge, I don't think Twitter was ever that profitable of a business. I think they had some good quarters during the 2010s, but aside from that, it's mostly been a loser. I don't know what it's like now, because I don't think the numbers are publicly available, because now it's been taken off of the public exchange, so to speak. But that was one of my first thoughts was, does Elon Musk even have the money to do this? And shouldn't he be paying off his creditors? A lot of his haters, I think, somewhat rightfully mock him for the fact that, like, oh, I don't know if it's right to mock him, but they're bringing up a legitimate concern that he borrowed a lot of money and he has to pay that back eventually. And if he doesn't, who knows what the future of Twitter is? And I think that's a legitimate concern. So one of my questions is, does he even have the money to be handing out to charitable causes in the first place? Not that I'm against businesses being charitable. I think there are definitely I can imagine there are some instances where it's reasonable and good for a business to partner with charities, to be charitable, to attract customers and be in the long-term profits of the business. I'm not sure if this is the case, though. And from what what I can tell, maybe it's a little bit of guilt, although Elon Musk, from what I can tell from following his career for the last decade, he's always had a little bit of a altruistic streak with him trying to get into electric cars and solar panels, an effort to do his part to save the world from climate change and whatnot. So I'm not even sure this is out of character, but yeah, I think that's a whole other discussion. Is this a proper role for his business? Should they even be involved in giving money away that they might not be able to afford to give away, considering that I think he still owes a lot of money to his creditors, and he may be jeopardizing, for all I know, this is all speculation, he might be jeopardizing the long-term health of Twitter if he's not focusing on paying off his creditors.
He made some good points that I hadn't previously thought of in relation to his creditors, but the way I tend to think about that is I think that that's up between him and his creditors. And if his investors or creditors are upset with how he gives money, then they should try to get the money back or sue him or, you know, something along those lines. Generally speaking, I don't care. Like, it doesn't bother me at all that people profit off of this. I there's nothing wrong with that at all. And I really don't care what people do with their own money. I would be upset if he was giving it to Hamas, but that doesn't appear to be the case. Although there is the risk, of course, that the money ends up in the hands of Hamas. But it doesn't really matter ultimately, but I'm very suspicious of the timing on this thing, that he's suddenly donating all the profits pertaining to discussions on the war to the victims of the war, as given his recent comments. We have a super chat from Jonathan Honig for $9.99. Jonathan, thank you very much. It's very much appreciated. Before we move on to the foreign aid, does anybody have anything they want to add to the conversation after everything that's been said? Okay.
No, I would add that
go ahead.
giving to charities in Gaza and to Hamas, I think there has been a documented history of like aid going into Gaza, and like the ships bringing in aid are also funneling in weapons or other materials that shouldn't be going there. And there have been other charities that have been like clandestinely for helping the plight of the people in Gaza and whatnot, but it's secretly being funneled into Hamas. So this is a legitimate concern, but to what Robert was saying earlier, from what I can tell, this is all going to a hospital. I know money is fungible, but it looks like they're doing their due diligence to make sure this goes to people who need it and not to a terrorist group.
Yeah, and if I guess I would like to say a little bit more of that, and it might be that part of my reasoning on this is influenced by war stories, even war movies. Think of old television shows like MASH, where we talk about recently. They did a poll of the people of Gaza, and 75% of them still support Hamas. And the strange thing is nobody took away the fact that 25% of them don't, which to me is really the news. That's the big news. We all already think that everybody in Gaza would love to shoot an Israeli in the head every day, the moment they could. And we say things like, there are no innocent people in Gaza. And the fact of the matter is, if we can do what we did in World War II, what we did in Korea, what we did in Vietnam, if we can find those people who are at least relatively innocent and make this less of a bloodbath of them and target what needs to be targeted at the other 75%, and in particular the militants, that will have an effect. That will help the military effort the same way that it did in other conflicts. I totally understand the people who say you can't take hostages, or you can't take innocent Gazans into account. I don't take innocent Gazans into account, not in terms of military action. But when we talk about sides, as if the enemy is homogeneous, and I get it, in military strategy, we have to regard them as homogeneous. But that's not the reality of the boots on the ground. To the extent that the Red Cross can have a positive impact over there, it's going to have a positive impact both during the war and after the war. It's a complicated topic. We could do a whole hour on it. But that is why I say I'm okay with what Musk is doing. I'm going to be okay with what the Red Cross is doing. I know there's going to be mistakes. I know they're going to do things that will help the Gazan militants as well. They will make mistakes, and that too is part of the landscape of war. But that's why I say I'm good with Musk doing this. I'm absolutely on board with it. Mistakes will be made just as they have been made. On net balance, I think it's a good thing. I just wanted to explain myself because I totally get. I was the first one who said money is the most fungible commodity in the world. We should not be sending money to Gaza without knowing exactly where every dime is spent. And in some cases, even if we know where every dime is spent. But this particular action, I'm good with it.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Next, foreign aid. And before we get into the particulars, I'd just like to see what everybody thinks. Is foreign aid, in your view, morally acceptable? In other words, is it morally acceptable for one government to use taxpayer dollars to fund foreign governments under any circumstances? Gilad, what are your thoughts on this?
You know, if we believe that that the government is only in charge on the individual rights of the citizens of the actual country, so what is the use of taking their money and giving it to any other nation, no matter how justified the donation is? Like, there is no justification of using the money that a hardworking mother is making, the taxpayers' money, or that she pays, and giving it to another country. But the reality that we live in is that the governments take a lot of our money, a lot of citizens' money, and give it to all kinds of, and invest it in all kinds of things that they should not invest in. So within that context, within the kind of relationships that we have today between countries, aid is sometimes needed, especially at times of all kinds of emergencies, like everything from nature events like hurricanes and tsunamis to wars like this, where there is a really humanitarian crisis at the end of it. So on the one hand, no, governments should not be imposing those donations on the citizens, but in the context of governments doing so much already, I think it is reasonable to support other countries, other nations at times of need.
Robert, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, phrased as foreign aid, that implies, well, there's a need, and the stronger nations have an altruistic duty to use their citizens' wealth to fill that need. Well, there's no case for that. You know, there's an old, I shouldn't say it. No, I will say this. There's an old and very crude joke. Why do dogs lick their balls? And the answer is,
Because they can.
because they can. Why does the U.S. government, why do U.S. government agencies require U.S. citizens to sacrifice their wealth in order to provide aid for foreign countries? Because they can. And we live in a world where altruism demands that the able sacrifice for the unable, the strong for the weak, the moral and the virtuous for those who are less so. So the short answer is no. Hell no. There is no reason for foreign aid. The only time foreign aid makes sense, the only time it is justified, is when it's a military requirement. If it is required to support a nation that is an ally and is in a substantial way helping, required for the United States self-defense. And there are cases to be made, and that's how they've tried to justify a lot of it. There are cases to be made. I would say 90% or better of what's going out is entirely unjustified, and the other 10% needs to be looked at very carefully.
Well said, Robert. Thank you. John, how about you? What say you on this topic?
Yeah, I pretty much completely agree with Robert on that one. There is no reason for giving other people's money away except in self-interested emergencies. So if they're an ally that's being attacked, yeah, I think it's in our interest to help them out, especially if they're a big trading partner. You know, all those people that are trading with them in our country are suffering because they can't trade with, another country. So I could see helping them out in a real emergency could be warranted. But yeah, most of the time though, like Robert says, it's just altruism or because we can, and we give it away to the worst governments. That just delegitimizes it all, in my opinion.
Thanks, John. And how about you, Kirk?
Yeah, why not why not just give all tens of trillions of dollars in GDP to the rest of the world, and then we can be the most moral country in the world by altruistic standards? No, I mean, I think in a perfect world, the United States would have a fully voluntarily funded government, and it'd be up to citizens and private businesses to, if you feel like you want to give to a noble cause that you think is noble, that is in your interest, then you're free to do so. But you have no right to vote up your neighbor's taxes to fund whatever generous causes you want to give other people's money to. But yeah, in a foreign policy context, I'm a little bit more understandable. Especially when it comes to Ukraine, I'd have to revisit the Budapest Memorandum. I know this always comes up when people debate about whether or not we should be helping out Ukraine. But yeah, in the 90s, after the end of the Cold War, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, which obviously puts them in a bit of an underdog situation, so to speak, against their neighbors, Russia. And I think there was an agreement. I might be mistaken on the details, but I think there was like some sort of understanding that if Russia were to ever invade Ukraine or whatever after they give up the nuclear weapons, then the West would help out Ukraine. So maybe I'm a little more forgiving on giving aid to Ukraine, especially if they're fighting one of our adversaries who's ruled by a brutal dictator. Although there's something to be said. It was mentioned earlier that, yeah, this sort of aid needs to be heavily monitored and there should be a goal in sight. And from what I can tell, there's not really that much of a goal in sight with what we're giving to Ukraine. And then with Israel too, or I guess this is more in the context of giving foreign aid to Gaza, but it's like, no, if you want to give your own money to charitable causes, then you're free to do so. But yeah, you shouldn't be forcing the taxpayers to do so.
Thanks, Kirk. Gilad, so evidently we have no Brits on today, unfortunately, but evidently the British government is giving, or they already have, I'm not sure, but they're giving 20 million pounds to the Palestinians in Gaza. I don't even know how to ask the question on this. It just seems so absurd to me that they would do such a thing, but I don't know. What are your thoughts, Gilad? What do you think about this?
Well, Israel has been supporting the population in Gaza for so many years. So, if Israel was supporting the Palestinians, is it that surprising that other Western countries are going to want to support them? It's not a surprise, especially given the fact that there is so much destruction in Gaza. There are so many citizens and so many children who get hurt and they need food, they need hospitals, they need shelter. We just had a storm in the region, so the weather was bad for 2 or 3 days. So it's understandable that people want to help, and what they lack, what most of the world lacks, what even most of the citizens in Israel lack, is the moral clarity of understanding that there is a conflict right now. There is one side who is constantly trying to destroy the other, and that the only way to solve this kind of conflicts has to be to eliminate that aggressor. And the fact of reality is that when you try to eliminate an aggressor that has power and that tries to hide behind civilians, there are going to be a lot of casualties in the way. But that's not a bug of that operation. That's a feature. That's what happens. And until Israel will begin being more explicit on the goal and on what it necessitates, people will ache for the Palestinians and will do all these kinds of stuff that end up sustaining the conflict longer and longer, and ends up over the long time causing more suffering and more loss of life.
Well said. In fact, show's over. Everything that needs to be said on the topic was just said. We can move on. Just kidding.
Well, I do
We
have something to add on this topic, if you don't mind.
No, we're not really ending, Kirk. I was just kidding.
Okay. Well, I thought you said you were moving on to the next topic. Okay.
Oh, no. This is the next topic. No, I was kidding. So we have a super chat from Robert Nasir. Robert Nasir. $1.99. Thank you very much, Robert. Robert, I'm sorry if I butchered your last name. I hear people say it differently all the time, but it's Nasir, right?
I hear it wrong all the time too. But yes, I know I've got cousins or God knows relatives in the Middle East who I have actually been corrected. I've been told, no, you're saying your name wrong. Say, well, in America we say Nasir. So it's kind of a running joke for me to put in my own super chats when I'm on the show. If Razi was here, he would give me a hard time about it, even though I know he loves the money. But especially if I'm going to make a self-gratification joke during the show, I can't resist putting in a super chat. I want to give a shout out to the people in the chat, even if you haven't super chatted, because I know we're up against ARI, I know we're up against Yaron Brook, and I really appreciate the participation. And Equal to Reality, who is a Brit, in fact, when we were in London, we got to meet him, says, on the UK government giving money to Gaza, WTF, and that's exactly the right response. So thank you for that too.
Beautiful. Gilad will be leaving soon. So Gilad, do you have anything you want to add before you go?
I have a couple of more minutes, so let's continue. I'll think of.
Well, Daniel's yelling at me over here that I got to bring it up that you're leaving. Make sure you get the word in. This to me, it speaks to the whole way that modern warfare is fought. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they had journalists going into the hospital in Gaza so that the Israeli army could prove to the journalists that there were tunnels underneath it, that these were, basically being used for military purposes by Hamas. And they showed them the stairwell to the tunnel. They showed them weapons that were, not in the tunnel, but were in the hospital. And the reporter says, well, the weapons could have been planted, and just the stairwell doesn't really tell us much of anything. And I'm just thinking, like, how can you fight a war when you're constantly having to prove that you're not trying to hurt people? I mean, I've been outspoken. I think that a country should do whatever they can to avoid harming civilians. But sometimes you just can't do anything to avoid harming civilians. And when your goal is to either fund the enemy or make sure everybody knows you're being kind to the enemy, you just can't win. And the British government giving 20 million pounds to the Palestinians, to me, is just indicative of that. Robert, what do you think of? Are they connected, these things, or am I just making connections that don't exist?
And they are absolutely connected. You're kind of jumping to the last topic about, and I mentioned it earlier. We have the Pope. The Pope. Are there still Catholics out there? It's 2023, for Christ's sake. But the Pope is out there saying military action by the IDF is terrorism. Well, as you suggest, Michael, do people not know what war is? This is war. This is not negotiations. This is not sitting at a conference table. It's not even a schoolyard brawl like our previous president was so fond of. This is war. This is people slaughtering each other. It's bizarre to me that the Pope would say, oh, yeah, the IDF is engaged in terrorism. There is a definition of terrorism. Even the UN understands that. But for Christ's sake, this is a war. And to anybody listening who is sympathetic to the Palestinians, and you know me, I always want to sort things out and I want to be nuanced, but what the hell did you think was going to happen after October 7th? If you go in and start a war. So to hell with the Pope, to hell with anybody who says, oh, well, in war, we shouldn't be so cruel. We shouldn't be so. It's war. Even if you don't own a dictionary, I know people don't have the dead tree edition of these things anymore, but it's online. Go to the Oxford Dictionary. It's not a long word, WAR. Look it up. This is war. Israel didn't ask for it, but Israel is fighting it.
It's interesting to me that you mentioned that are there still Catholics today? I remember reading Nietzsche, from the 1800s talking about Christianity, and he says, can anyone basically fathom that this sort of thing is still believed in? And it's 130 years later, and we still have to listen to the Pope. John, what do you think about the British given this 20 million pounds?
It's despicable. It's horrible. But I'm unclear. Are the Brits actually giving it to the Gazan government, or are they trying to do it the hospital way, or how are they wording that?
All it says here is that they're sending it to Gaza. They're giving foreign aid to Gaza. So,
yeah, I mean, that's just like, I just see a big blank check for terrorists in my mind when I hear that.
Yeah.
People need to understand that war is the opposite of civilization. There's no such thing as a civilized war. It is the absence of being civilized. And they're trying their damnedest to make war a more civilized process, which is, I guess, indicative of an altruist trying to make the impossible their moral code. So I don't know. I'm just at a loss how despicable that is for the UK government to do.
That whole idea, John, of making the war civilized it's true, but only partly, because they only want to make it civilized on behalf of one side, right? There's not all this international pressure on Hamas to make sure that they're not killing civilians. There's not people running around with Hamas terrorists to have them improve, their claims about what the Israelis are doing. This type of stuff only applies to countries like Israel or the United States. We have to prove and we have to be civilized, but the enemy never does. In that, I think it goes right to what you said, the altruism, because we're viewed as the stronger and we're not in need, whereas these countries are. Kirk, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a strong sense I'm with you guys where it's like, we're gonna hear what the dope has to say about this war and listen to him. I'm like, who cares what the dope thinks? I dream of a world where nobody takes this Pope, sorry, seriously, because yeah, I mean, this guy, not to mention, this guy already has a long history of being pretty socialist on economic issues. He's really playing to the whole warmonger crowd, the climate hysteric crowd, and all of that stuff. From what I can tell, he's turning a lot of conservatives in places like America away from free markets and focusing on stuff like wealth inequality and whatnot. So already he's a pretty bad guy from what I can tell. And now he's like chiming in on wars. And yeah, it's like, why does anyone take this guy seriously? And it's like, oh yeah, because a lot of people happen to be religious, happen to be Catholic, and even a lot of secular people look up to this guy because he's quote unquote more moderate and he panders to the more socialist elements. And not to mention, when talking about foreign aid, there was this story that was published on NBC News back in October that talks about the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that Gaza has gotten from countries like Iran and Qatar over the years. A lot of it goes for military purposes. And even in this article, it talks about how even goods that are smuggled into Gaza for the purposes of residents trying to better their lives, it often gets seized and taxed by Hamas. And from what I could tell, areas like Gaza, they don't need foreign aid. What they really need is freedom and capitalism if they want to rise out of poverty. Unfortunately, they are ruled by a bunch of genocidal maniacs who are not interested in that. And they're more interested in trying to destroy their neighbors. And it looks like that's where a lot of the money they get goes to, is that purpose.
For me, the idea of the Pope chiming in or having anything to say about this is ridiculous on so many levels. One, he's a mystic who belongs in the Middle Ages. Two, has nothing to do with this, as the Vatican is not involved in the war. The Vatican was not attacked. But a big thing that really pisses me off about him chiming in on this is the fact that he has to know, and if he doesn't, he should know the role that the Vatican played in harboring Nazis and hiding Nazis from seeking the penalties for their crimes. When you know that you belong to an organization that has an anti-Semitic history that's hidden Nazis, just shut the F up. All right, yeah. Like I don't want to hear what you have to say, Pope Francis. I really don't. I mean, you could go to hell for all I care. You know what I mean? But and to equate Israeli military retaliation to terrorism, it's intellectual chaos. It's absolutely absurd. Gilad, what are your thoughts on the Pope, or the dope, as Kirk called him?
I'll tell you the truth. I haven't thought about the Pope for, wow, many months or even years until today. But today I thought about him twice. One time was when I got the itinerary for today's talk, and that's when I heard that he called the military action by the IDF terrorism. But earlier today I saw that one of the, I think it's a mother of a hostage, of an Israeli hostage in the Gaza Strip, met up with the Pope and showed him a video of her son. I think he was amputated. He lost his arm in that attack on October 7th. And she showed him the last video that she has of her son from that day, over almost 50 days ago. So apparently, people care about him, and that's what brought that Israeli mother to try and show that leader, look what happened to my innocent child who got abducted, who got severely hurt by the terrorists without any military objective. Just he was attacked for the sake of attacking a Jew, a civilian, an Israeli. So it really is sad that instead of the Pope realizing that, okay, this is terrorism, this is attacking civilians for the sake of attacking civilians, when he was showed that by a mother who is missing her son for such a long time, when he has that context to blame Israel as committing actions that are terrorism, that's just hypocritic and stupid and evil, and yeah, it's sad to see that it happens.
Thanks, Gilad. Robert, why do we even have to still hear about the Pope? I mean, I get right, there's 1 billion Catholics or so, but I guess my question is deeper. Why are there still 1 billion Catholics in this world? Why, in a modern age where we're able to have this meeting, for instance, where we've got people from all over the place talking on a screen, and it's going to project out to, who knows how many people are going to be watching in this day and age? Why do we even still have this stuff?
It's a great question. And as we see this war enter a new stage here, with the ceasefires coming up and the hostage negotiations, we may on the channel bring in some other not entirely unrelated topics besides the October 7th war. And I hope people continue to regard that as the October 7th war, and, to steal the phrase, never forget what happened on that day. But the answer to your question gets into related issues of, well, what's going on with Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Jordan Peterson and people who are giving Christianity credit for sustaining and advancing Western civilization? Sadly, the mission of the Ayn Rand Center UK is just beginning, and there are still people who credit Christianity and even Catholicism with keeping Western civilization going. It's the craziest thing in 2023 when, as you say, we've got information, we've got technology, we have got such a magnificent secular life on earth. If you go to any large city, particularly in the United States, but London, Paris, even in semi-socialist, arguably communist countries, look at Shanghai and Beijing these days, and yet there are people who look at all of this and say, yeah, I still believe in a higher power and all of the insanity that goes with that if you've read your Bible and take it seriously. The short answer is they give Christianity credit. Again, Ayaan Hirsi Ali is not converting to Christianity because she believes their metaphysics, not because she believes that there's a God up there and that the stories in the Bible are factually true. She thinks Christianity gets the credit for Western civilization. You're right. It's a great question. We'll talk about it more again as we see. I almost hate to say, as we break away a little bit from war coverage, because the reason we're going to break away a little from war coverage, I'm sure, is going to turn out to be that we have entered a new stage and a new normal. And my hope is that these new negotiations, these ceasefires for hostage releases, trading, my God, on a 3-to-1 basis, Gazans who are held by Israel for the hostages. I hope that this doesn't become a new normal and that this is merely a tactic and that the IDF is going to continue to kick ass and actually win this war. But we will see. Short answer to your question is, yeah, people still credit Christianity with all sorts of things it does not deserve the credit for.
You're right. I have people tell me that the whole doctrine of natural rights, for instance, stems from the Bible. And
Yep.
I'm just, where in the Bible do you find natural rights, separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism? All the things that the United States is built on are nowhere to be found. The word God, they like to point out, is in the Declaration, but it's nowhere in the Constitution. In fact, all we have is that the government has no business being involved in religion, but yet people still cling to the myth that Christianity is at the root of the free society that we, well, to some extent still have. John, what do you think about the Pope? I mean, does he need to be taken seriously because there's so many Catholics? Does anybody care what he says? How reprehensible is he? I mean, just unload on us. Let me know what you think. Let us know.
Well, I try not to think of him too much if I don't have to. So, yeah, I think people just are looking for answers, and he pretends to have them. So, I don't necessarily think it's anything Christianity has or doesn't have or whatever. It's people like Ayaan have stated clearly that they're drawn to it because secularism doesn't offer the tools to fight real evil. And when I go on to, I'm part of several atheist pages on Facebook anyway. And when I go on those and I read the things atheists say and romanticize skepticism like it is the philosophy that replaces religion, I don't blame people like Ayaan for thinking the things that she does. The atheists are completely bankrupt unless you are part of objectivism. That is the only group of atheists that can offer a solution to these issues. Because right now, the atheists, most of them side with Hamas. They hold the same moral considerations as Christianity, but then they don't like to admit it. And the moral relativism just runs rampant. And so I could see someone saying, well, we need to join with this group because they have the power and they are the ones that can defeat the evil. Not that I'm saying it's right, but I understand the thought process. Right now, atheism has nothing to offer. And so people are going to continue to turn to places that even pretend to have answers. And that seems to be Christianity right now, but obviously that's just by default.
Thanks, John. Kirk, what are your thoughts on this? And what role do you think raw anti-Semitism has in the Pope's statements? I mean, how much of this is just pure, traditional hatred of Jews? Is that involved at all? What's happening here?
I'm not sure if I'm willing to go that far. I'd have to read more into whether or not, this Pope has a tendency to be anti-Semitic. My guess is it's more altruism. And I know, the Catholic Church has a long history. And I want to add on to your point that I believe the Pope during the 20s or 30s helped legitimize Mussolini in Italy. And it was kind of like self-beneficial union, because Mussolini, who used to be an atheist, he got to really strengthen his grip on Italy by getting legitimized by the Pope to the more religious elements within Italy. But I'm not sure if that applies to this current Pope. But to go what you were saying earlier about whether or not the Bible influenced America's founding, I've been on a painstaking project over the last year or so where I go on Twitch for 2 hours each week where I read the Bible and I'm trying to figure out which parts of this Bible had some sort of inspiration or influence on the founding of America. And really the only thing I can find, and it's few and far between, it's when God said, like, commands judges to treat people fairly whenever they're accused of something. That's really about it. And it's immediately undermined by a lot of the more horrible stuff that's in the Bible, especially when God is pretty adamant in the Old Testament about the fact that your life doesn't belong to you, it belongs to God, and you need to obey his commands, follow his commands. It's not friendly life advice, it's not polite suggestions, it's commands. And if you don't, bad things will happen. And yesterday, when I was doing another episode of this, I was reminded, I opened Ben Shapiro's The Right Side of History, which was published 4 years ago. And he says some of the same stuff you guys are talking about in pertaining to Ayn Rand. He's very adamant about the fact that Western civilization in America has its roots in Athens and Jerusalem. And he's really adamant about this. And at one point he says, after all, to me, my interests are far more pressing than your rights. And atomistic individualism has a tendency to drift towards self-justifying oppression of others. And then he also he goes on to invoke Voltaire here, saying that I want my lawyer, my tailor, my servants, even my wife to believe in God, because it means that I shall be cheated and robbed and cuckolded less often. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. And we're seeing this mentality. We're seeing others like Ayn Rand kind of embrace this mentality where they might not embrace the metaphysics and the mysticism of Christianity explicitly, but hey, it's, necessary to organize society around. I remember Dave Rubin kind of coming around on this idea a couple of years ago too.
Thanks, Kirk. Robert, the three topics that we talked about today and what we all see happening over there, you mentioned that the war entering a new phase. Put on your Nostradamus hat for me. What's next? I mean, is Israel, are they winding this thing down to where they're just going to get back to the previous status quo, or are they actually going to go forward with it? I think it's over. I think it's basically done. I mean, they may have some more incursions into Gaza, but they're not going to obliterate Hamas, in my view. What are your thoughts?
If you had asked me yesterday, I would say the IDF has got things well in hand, regardless of what Netanyahu wants. If you ask me today, the answer is you're probably right. I think that the hostage trading will go on for the next, mathematically, 21, 24 days before it's all worked out. It's only going to go so far. If I had to guess, I would say it's going to fall apart. And whether that's after this initial exchange or after a few more days of it, it just can't work. I don't see any way to make it work. And I don't see any way you get to the other end of this with Hamas still existing as a governing body of Gaza. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what that would look like? It would essentially look like no harm, no foul. And Hamas didn't actually achieve anything either but destruction, but Israel is left in the exact same position. It's hard to believe, after what has been described as the worst disaster for Jews since the Holocaust, that this is just going to be another item on the timeline, and there will be more and more and more, and the issue's never resolved. So the short answer to your question is, I don't know, but I don't like the look of it.
Robert, after September 11th, 2001, if somebody would have said to me in 2023, after 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the Taliban will be back in charge over there and we'd be gone, I would have never believed it. I would have said, there's no way after what we've suffered, we're going to go that route.
Yes.
But of course, we did. Right away, they started about winning hearts and minds and dropping
yeah.
leaflets to the children, and they had donations to the kids over there and all that. And it just
Oh, and it's
seems like
worse than
that's,
that,
yeah,
because how many lives, how many American lives, and we
exactly.
could talk about treasure, wealth, money, but how many American lives were spent freeing, oh, wait, the wrong country, Iraq, from its dictator, Saddam Hussein, then telling them, okay, now that he's gone, we're going to walk away and you can elect whatever kind of government you want, which of course is going to turn out to be not a pro-American government, much less pro-democracy government. So you're right. Who would have thought after 9/11 that we would fight the wrong war, squander whatever goodwill we had of the people who had some sympathy for us, fight an endless war in Afghanistan without winning, just like we did in North Korea, or in Korea, just like we did in Vietnam, walk away as the defeated. How is the United States unable to win any war in the world, much less that war? Now, I get it. I understand it would have taken much more brutality than we are willing to do to deal with an enemy that lives in tunnels and attacks the way that I get all of that. But you're exactly right. After 9/11, how can this be that we are where we are, having done what little and the wrong things that we've done? So again, I'm not optimistic. I like the attitude of the IDF. I like the fact that they took strong action right away. The 4-hour ceasefires were a bad sign. These 4-day and hostage release exchange is an even worse sign. My hope is that the military part of the government, that the IDF will not lose their resolve. But Netanyahu's running the place. It's not good.
Thanks, Robert. John, what do you think? Does Israel end up just like we did with the Taliban back in charge? Are they going to end up with Hamas? And it's even worse because they're right on their border, whereas Afghanistan's thousands of miles away from us. So is Israel going to return to the status quo, or are you more optimistic?
No, I'm not very optimistic. I just don't see how they're going to be able to just turn fighting back on after all these pauses without the world, freaking out again. Ideas are powerful, and you just have to look at the ideas that they are acting on, and you'll see how it's going to turn out. And right now, they're acting on the ideas of civilized warfare, which is just an impossibility.
Thanks, John. Kirk, I'll put the same question to you. Does Israel end up in the same place? And what do you think? Does Netanyahu go? I'm just going to throw that in there. Is he going to stay in power after all this, or are they going to toss him?
I don't know enough about Israeli politics to know what chances Netanyahu has at sustaining his power, but from the little I've seen, I think his approval ratings have tanked ever since October 7th. But yeah, I hate to say, I think they're probably going to go down the same, end up in the same place America is now, where the Taliban is back in power in Afghanistan and nothing much is really accomplished.
The only thing
I hope I'm wrong, by the way.
The only thing
I hope so too.
Accomplished is by Hamas dragging Israel's name through the mud. Everything will be the same, except more people are going to hate Israel.
Right. And even in Gaza, you're right. Hamas now is going to have more grievances, pretend grievances to complain about, raise up more terrorists, and more of the same. All right.
And there are still hostages left in Gaza too, right?
Oh, yeah.
So even if they turn the fighting back on, as you say, and they keep going in, like, what's to stop Hamas saying, okay, we've had enough, we'll release some more hostages for another week ceasefire? And yeah, I think, unfortunately, it sounds like Hamas has the moral upper hand here, and Israel is unwilling to do what is necessary to crush them.
I think you're right. They actually, I believe, they'll extend the ceasefire for every additional, I think it's 10 hostages released. I'm not positive about the number, but they agreed to something along those lines. For they're initially it's going to be 50, and then they'll extend the ceasefire if Hamas will release 10 more, and so on and so forth. I might be wrong about the number, but I don't think so. All right, go ahead, John.
They're just showing the whole world that taking hostages works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Before we close out, anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, vote for Nikki Haley. Yeah, there's a New York Times essay, opinion piece on comparing Javier Milei, this great, what they're calling a neo-libertarian, like a neocon, but on the libertarian side. The victory of this pro-capitalism guy down in Argentina. Oh my gosh, this is so great, except he's also kind of a goofball, kind of a character, and they're taking advantage of that to try to cut into him in every way they can. And so the Times is saying this morning, did Argentina finally get their own Trump? They're going to compare this guy to Trump. And I'm thinking, Milei is as good as you could have asked for. And at the same time, now looking at what's going on in the Middle East, I'm thinking, ooh, God knows we didn't need a Trump. We don't need a Milei. What we need is a Thatcher. What we need is a Reagan. If we had those kind of leaders today, for all my disagreements with Ronald Reagan, and for the few disagreements that I also had with Margaret Thatcher, if they were in charge, what people forget is the United States, the U.S. was attacked on October 7th. We have American citizens who are still hostages being held by Hamas. This is our war too. We don't need Jimmy Carter. We know what happened under Jimmy Carter when the Americans were taken hostage. We also know what happened when Reagan took power and the hostages were released. We can argue could have been done even better, should have been done even better. We need a Reagan. We need a Thatcher. We don't need a Trump. We
Definitely don't need a Biden.
We don't need Biden and Netanyahu. Look, Biden has actually been speaking very well. He's been talking real strong, just like Netanyahu. We had an American president who once said, well, speak softly and carry a big stick. And what I'm seeing from Biden and what I'm seeing from Netanyahu is they're speaking strongly and carrying a weak stick. We can't afford that. I don't know anybody on the presidential scene who is a Reagan, who is a Thatcher. Closest it comes I see is in Nikki Haley. That's why she's got my vote.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you all. I think we've had very good discussions today. Daniel, what do we got for announcements?
No upcoming shows today, but we'll be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show.
Thanksgiving Day?
On Thanksgiving?
Awesome.
It's not Thanksgiving in Britain.
Yeah. Well, we'll get some of those Brits on that you mentioned, Michael. They can come and do the show.
Well, I'll say this, and I think Mr. Naysayer will agree with me. Go Lions.
Oh, yeah. A team that hasn't won in ages, and finally they remembered how to win. There we go.
All right.
We're smiling in Motown. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And to quote the great Mark Pellegrino, remember to check your premises. Take care.
Recording stopped.